All right, today we are diving deep into something pretty fundamental, the science of sexual desire. So, what really shapes it? I mean, it's this huge part of our lives, right? It affects our relationships, how we see ourselves, everything. Is it all just biology? Or maybe our relationships, where we are in life? Well, let's find out. To get real answers, you need data, a lot of data. And the study we're looking at today, well, it included this many people. Yeah, that's right. Over 67,000 people. This makes it one of the biggest studies ever done on this, giving us what might be the clearest blueprint yet for understanding human desire. So let's jump in and see what they found. Okay, so the first thing that jumps out from all this data are the two biggest pieces of the puzzle. We're talking about the huge differences they found when looking at gender and age. Okay, I know this graph looks a little busy, but just sit with me and look at that first panel, panel A. See the orange line? That's men. The blue line? That's women. And you can see it right away. Across the entire lifespan, that orange line is consistently, and I mean consistently, higher than the blue one. The study basically confirmed that, on average, men report way higher sexual desire. In fact, that gap is so big that scientists call it a large effect size. It's one of the most solid findings we have in this field. But, and this is a really important but, that the researchers themselves stressed, we're talking about averages here. This quote from the paper says it all. At any given age, there are many women with higher sexual desire than most men of that age. The variation between individuals is massive. So think of these as broad trends, not your personal destiny. Okay, so we can see desire definitely changes as we get older. But does it just, slowly fade away? Is it a simple decline? Well, not exactly. The data actually showed us something way more interesting. And here's that surprise, right in the graph. Look at that orange line for men again. You'd expect it to just go down, right? But it doesn't. It actually goes up after young adulthood and hits a peak somewhere in the late 30s to early 40s. Now that is fascinating. It totally goes against the common idea that male desire is just all about testosterone, because T levels usually start to decline way earlier than that. All right, so we've got gender and age down. But what happens when, life happens? Let's talk about how big things like being in a relationship or having kids can really change the picture. And here we go with another finding that might make you scratch your head a bit. If we look at panel B here, it's comparing single people to people in a relationship. Now, you'd think that being partnered up would maybe even out the desire levels between men and women, right? But nope, the data shows the exact opposite. That gap in desire is actually bigger for people who are in relationship. Okay, and what about kids? What happens when you add them to the mix? Well, it turns out parenthood hits men and women's desire in completely opposite ways. The difference is pretty stark. For men, the data showed that having more kids was actually linked to higher sexual desire. But for women, it was the opposite. More kids tended to mean slightly lower desire. The researchers think this could have a lot to do with just how differently the stress and demands of caregiving fall on men and women. And this graph, wow, panel D just lays it out so clearly. Look along the bottom, that's the number of kids, from 0 up to 5. Now watch what happens to the orange line for men and the blue line for women. With every single kid, those two lines just drift further and further apart. The gap just keeps growing. Okay, we've tackled the big ones: age, relationships, family. But the study also dug up some less obvious, kind of surprising factors. And let's start with one you might not expect: your job. Yeah, believe it or not, what you do for a living seems to be connected to your sex drive. And what's really interesting is that this connection is still there even after they control for things like age and gender. That means there's something about the job itself that's playing a role. So, who's at the top? The data points to people in the professional military, machine operators, and senior managers. They reported the highest desire. And at the other end of the scale, we see elementary workers, office and customer service staff, and sales workers. Now, the study doesn't tell us why, but you can't help but wonder, right? Maybe it's about physical activity, or stress, or even power dynamics at work. Okay, so beyond your job, there's another really key piece of this whole demographic blueprint: your sexual orientation. And just looking at panel F here, you can see it's another major factor. So if we break it down, here's what they found. The highest average desire, that was reported by bisexual individuals. Pansexuals were also high on the list. Then came heterosexuals with lower levels. And of course, by definition, asexual individuals reported the lowest desire of all. Okay, let's take a breath. We've looked at gender, age, family, work, sexual orientation, a lot of different pieces. Now it's time to put them all together and see what the final blueprint actually looks like. So after all that, after putting all these powerful factors into the equation, the huge question is, how much of the puzzle have we actually solved? How much of what makes us all so different in our desires can these things really explain? The final answer from this absolutely massive analysis is 28.3%. That's right. When you combine everything we've talked about, your gender, your age, if you have kids, what you do for a living, your orientation, all of it together explains about 28% of the differences between people's sex drives. That is a surprisingly clear picture, all just painted by our basic demographics. And make no mistake, that 28% is a huge deal. It's a massive leap forward in understanding this stuff. As the authors themselves put it, this study gives us the most comprehensive account to date of this foundational blueprint for desire. It's the best map we've ever had. But that leaves us with one last, really fascinating question to think about, doesn't it? If our basic life stats, our demographics, can explain about 28% of our desire, what on earth explains the other 72%? That huge uncharted territory? Well, that's where things like psychology, personality, and all of our unique individual life stories come in. And that's a whole other mystery just waiting to be explored.